Freud once said, "Unexpressed emotions never really die. They're buried alive, and sooner or later, they come back in uglier ways." And here's the question I want you to hold from the very beginning. What if the mistakes you keep calling failures aren't mistakes at all? What if they're rehearsals? Rehearsals of an unfinished story inside you. Why is it that you can change cities, change jobs, fall in love with someone new, and still, the same pain finds you again? Why does life feel like it's conspiring to drag you back into the same trap, even when you swear you'll never fall again? Freud believed there was a hidden force, darker than desire, stronger than reason. He called it the compulsion to repeat. And Jung added something even more haunting. He said it isn't just destruction, it's a drama staged by the psyche, again and again, until you recognize the role you've been playing blindly. Picture this. A woman swears she'll never fall for the same kind of partner again. But she does. Different face. Same story. A man promises he'll never lose his temper. But one small spark, and it explodes. A professional switches jobs, chasing freedom. New office, new boss. Same invisible cage. Different actors. Different stage. Same play. You've said it before. I can't believe this happened again. That's repetition. Freud saw it clearly. His patients didn't just remember their trauma. They lived it, over and over, as if an invisible hand were dragging them back into the past. After the First World War, he treated soldiers haunted by nightmares. They didn't just dream about their battles. They sought out danger again, almost as if they wanted to relive what had nearly destroyed them. Why would anyone return to pain? Freud's answer was unsettling. There must be a drive deeper than pleasure, deeper than reason, a loyalty to repetition itself. He called it the death instinct, not literal death, but the pull back to what is already known, even if what is known is unbearable. But Jung wasn't satisfied. For him, repetition wasn't about destruction, it was about transformation. He noticed these cycles were often tied to what he called complexes, clusters of memory and emotion buried deep in the psyche. Complexes aren't passive. They have energy. They have a will of their own. It's as if little personalities live inside us. Think of the last time you overreacted. Afterward, you said, "That wasn't me." And you were right. It wasn't the you of today. It was an old fragment, a child who felt abandoned, a teenager who felt humiliated, a younger self still stuck in the past. This is why mistakes repeat. Not because you're weak, not because you're broken, but because something unresolved is demanding attention. Let me give you a story. There was a man, let's call him Daniel. He grew up with a father who was explosive, a mother who was silent. Daniel swore he would never be like his father, never raise his voice, never lose control. But as an adult, the anger came anyway. In every relationship, the very thing he hated most in his father lived on in him. Why? Because the shadow you refuse to face always returns. And it returns wearing the mask of your next accident. Here's the truth. Your mistakes aren't random. They're messages. The shadow's handwriting on the wall of your life. Freud thought repetition was a death wish. Jung reframed it as a call to wholeness. The psyche repeats until you finally stop running and face what you've been avoiding. So take a breath. Think of the last time you said, "Not again. Not this." Who was really in the room with you? Was it only the people standing there? Or was it also the ghost of your past, your father, your mother, your childhood self, your unhealed wound? Because here's the truth Freud and Jung both uncovered. The past doesn't stay in the past. It lives on. It haunts. It repeats. until you face it. That's the surface. But underneath, the story runs deeper. The real question is why we resist change, why the shadow is so hard to face, and, most importantly, how to finally break the cycle. But for now, remember this. Every mistake that repeats is not just a failure. It's a message, a summons, an invitation to finally wake up. You've seen it now. The mistakes you repeat are not random. They're rehearsals, replays of old wounds, the shadow's handwriting on the wall of your life. But knowing this is only the beginning. The real question is, how do you break the cycle? How do you step off the stage when the unconscious keeps casting you in the same role? The first step is this. You must learn to recognize the pattern as it happens. That sounds simple, but it isn't. Because the unconscious doesn't announce itself with a warning. It arrives as emotion, a surge, a reaction, the heat of anger, the sting of shame, the cold of abandonment. And in that moment, you think it's about the present. You think it's about this person, this job, this disappointment. But really, it's about the past. So the task is to catch yourself in the act, to pause when you feel the familiar surge and ask, who else is in the room with me right now? Is it my partner? Or is it also my father, my mother, my younger self, still waiting to be heard? When you ask that question, you begin to loosen the spell. Jung called this making the unconscious conscious. And it is the single most powerful act you can take. Because the moment you can see the pattern, you are no longer inside it blindly. You have perspective. You have choice. That's why reflection is so important. Not reflection weeks later, but reflection in the moment. When your heart races, when your voice rises, when you feel abandoned, pause and ask, is this reaction about now, or is it about then? Let me give you an example. Imagine you're in a relationship. Your partner doesn't respond to your message for hours. A wave of anxiety rises in you. Your mind spins. They don't care. They've forgotten me. They've left me. You want to lash out, or withdraw, or beg for reassurance. But before you act, you pause. You ask, is this about them, or is this about me? And suddenly, you remember. The countless nights as a child when you waited for your parent to come home. The silence. The uncertainty. The fear of being forgotten. Your body isn't reacting to your partner. It's reacting to that old wound. Now you see the repetition. And in that moment of awareness, the cycle loosens. This is the first practical step. Not to change everything at once, but to notice. To recognize the script while it's unfolding. Because once you can name it, you are no longer fully trapped by it. The second step is even harder. You must turn toward the shadow. The parts of yourself you've rejected, your anger, your need, your vulnerability, your fear. These are the very parts that return as mistakes. What you bury doesn't vanish. It acts out. It repeats. So the work is not to suppress these parts even more. It's to acknowledge them, to bring them into dialogue. Jung often used active imagination for this. He encouraged his patients to sit quietly, to allow images and voices from the unconscious to emerge, and to engage them, to speak with them, to listen to them. It sounds strange, but think of it this way. If complexes are like little personalities within you, then ignoring them won't help. You must learn what they want, what they fear, what story they are trying to finish. Because only then can you integrate them. Only then can you stop repeating them. Let me give you another story. There was a woman, let's call her Anna. She had a pattern of sabotaging her own success. Every time she achieved something meaningful, she would procrastinate, make mistakes, or withdraw. She told herself she was lazy or afraid of responsibility. But in her work with Jung, something deeper emerged. As a child, whenever she shined, her mother grew jealous, cold, withdrawn. Her success was punished. Her light was unsafe. So as an adult, her unconscious kept the pact. Better to fail. Better to hide. Better to repeat the mistake than to risk the punishment again. When she finally saw this, when she realized that the mistake was not random, but the shadow's way of protecting her, everything shifted. Her task was not to shame herself for failing. It was to thank the younger self who had learned to hide, and then, to slowly teach that part of her, it was safe to shine now. This is the work, to see the shadow, to listen to it, and to integrate it. But here's the danger. Most people don't want to face their shadow. They prefer to blame others, or to numb themselves, or to tell themselves, this is just who I am. Because the shadow is uncomfortable. It contains what we fear, what we deny, what we don't want to admit. But here's the truth. If you don't face your shadow will face you. And it will face you in the form of repeated mistakes. The more you deny it, the louder it becomes. The more you suppress it, the stronger it acts out. That's why ignoring the shadow never works. It only ensures the cycle continues. So the second step is shadow work. Not by trying to kill the shadow, but by learning from it, integrating it, making peace with the parts of you once rejected. And here's the paradox. When you do this, the shadow stops acting out because it no longer needs to. The third step is this. You must create new experiences. The unconscious repeats the old story because it doesn't know another ending. It keeps staging the same play, hoping this time the outcome will change. But the only way the outcome changes is if you consciously act differently. This is terrifying, because it means stepping into the unknown. For the abandoned child, it means risking trust. For the angry man, it means staying calm. For the addict, it means tolerating emptiness without numbing it. It feels unbearable. But only in this way does the psyche learn a new script. Let me give you a simple example. Imagine someone who always withdraws in conflict. They learned as a child that silence was safer. So as an adult, every argument ends in retreat. Every relationship feels distant. The pattern repeats. Now imagine that person decides just once to stay in the conversation, to speak, to risk being heard. The moment is terrifying. Their heart races. Their body screams, "Run." But they stay. And in that moment, a new ending is written. The unconscious learns that silence is not the only option, that retreat is not the only script. And slowly, the repetition begins to loosen. This is the path. Notice the pattern. Face the shadow. Create a new experience. None of it is easy, but it is the only way to stop repeating the same mistakes. And here's where we slow down, because there's a harder truth waiting underneath. The reasons we resist change, the reasons the shadow is so hard to face, and the practices you'll need if transformation is ever going to be real. For now, remember this. Every mistake is a message. Every repetition is an invitation. And every time you pause to notice the script, you take one step closer to freedom. By now, you can see the path. Notice the pattern. Face the shadow. Create a new ending. It sounds clear. But clarity doesn't mean it's easy. Because as soon as you try to step off the stage, the resistance begins. The first pitfall is denial. Most people don't want to admit they repeat themselves. They want to believe each mistake is unique, that it's bad luck, or someone else's fault, or just a matter of circumstance. But denial is the shadow's greatest ally. As long as you call it coincidence, the script continues. So the first pitfall is refusing to name the pattern. The way out is radical honesty. To admit, yes, this has happened before. Yes, I have been here before. That honesty is painful, but it is also freeing. Because once you admit the repetition, you can begin to change it. The second pitfall is projection. Instead of facing the shadow within, we see it in others. We blame. We accuse. We attack. You project your own rejected anger onto your partner. You call them controlling, selfish, cruel, all the while refusing to see those same tendencies in yourself. You project your own fear of abandonment onto your friend. You accuse them of leaving, when really it's your own fear screaming in the dark. Projection feels easier than self-reflection. But projection guarantees the cycle continues, because you're still acting out the script. Only now you've cast someone else in your role. The third pitfall is despair. You notice the pattern. You see the shadow. And instead of hope, you feel hopeless. You say to yourself, if I keep repeating this, then I will never change. But despair is another trick of the shadow. It tells you the story is fixed, that you are condemned. The truth is the opposite. The very moment you recognize the pattern, you've already changed it. Because recognition is the beginning of freedom. Despair is a lie told by the part of you afraid of growth. The fourth pitfall is rushing. The unconscious does not change overnight. You cannot undo decades of repetition in a week. But many people, once they see the pattern, want it gone immediately. And when it doesn't vanish, they give up. But repetition softens slowly. Every time you notice it, you weaken its hold. Every time you act differently, you write a new ending. The progress is gradual, but it is real. So patience is essential. You must be willing to walk the path slowly, again and again, until the shadow learns a new way. The fifth pitfall is fear of identity loss. Many people don't realize how much their mistakes have become part of who they are. The addict, the angry man, the rescuer, the victim. These roles become identities. And when you step out of the role, you face the terrifying question, if I am not this, then who am I? The fear of that unknown is so great that many prefer to stay in the cage. Better the prison I know than the freedom I don't understand. But this is where Jung's idea of individuation becomes vital. To become whole, you must allow the old identities to die. Only then can the larger self emerge. The death of an identity feels like loss, but it is really birth. So how do you stay with this process? How do you keep walking the path when the pitfalls appear? You anchor yourself in practice, not just abstract reflection, but daily, living practice. Here are a few ways to begin. First, journaling with the shadow. Write down the situations that trigger you. Notice the patterns. Ask yourself, who am I really reacting to here? What part of me is surfacing? What does this part want? Let the words flow without judgment. Because often the shadow speaks first in fragments, in strange sentences, in images that don't quite make sense. But if you listen, a story begins to appear. Second, active imagination. Jung used this method often. Sit quietly, let an image arise. Maybe it's a child, maybe it's an angry figure, maybe it's an animal. And instead of pushing it away, speak to it. Ask, who are you? What do you want from me? What are you protecting? It may sound strange, but remember, these are complexes. They are parts of you, and they need dialogue. Because when you listen, they no longer need to act out unconsciously. Third, conscious action. Choose one moment where you usually repeat the mistake and do something different. If you always withdraw in conflict, stay and speak once. If you always explode in anger, pause and breathe. If you always chase unavailable people, choose to walk away sooner. The action doesn't need to be perfect. It only needs to be different. Because every different action is a crack in the old script, a doorway to a new ending. Fourth, reflection with another. Complexes live in secrecy. They thrive in isolation. But when you speak them aloud, to a therapist, to a trusted friend, to a journal you return to, they lose some of their grip. Because the moment your inner world is shared, it enters consciousness, and consciousness breaks the spell. These practices are not magic tricks. They are slow, difficult, and uncomfortable. But they are also how repetition becomes transformation. Do you remember the question we began with? What if the mistakes you call failures aren't mistakes at all? What if the mistakes you keep calling failures aren't mistakes at all? What if they're rehearsals? Rehearsals of an unfinished story inside you. You've seen now that the story is written by the shadow, by the complex, by the parts of you still stuck in the past. And you've seen that the way forward is not to deny them, not to blame others, not to run away. The way forward is to recognize the pattern, to face the shadow, and to create a new ending. So ask yourself now, what is the mistake that keeps repeating in your life? Where do you find yourself saying, "Not again"? And then ask, whose voice is speaking through that mistake? Whose ghost is standing in the room with you? What unfinished story is demanding to be heard? Because the moment you can name it, you take your first step off the stage. The script loosens. The play begins to change, and you realize something profound. You are not condemned to repeat forever. You are being rehearsed into consciousness. We've already seen how buried emotions return as repeated mistakes. We've explored how the shadow hides inside them, and how noticing the pattern is the first crack in the cycle. But maybe now you're left with doubts, questions you whisper to yourself when no one is listening. Because if repetition is real, what does that mean for your life? Let's take those questions one by one. If these patterns are unconscious, am I really responsible? It's tempting to say no, to say, this isn't my fault. The past is too heavy. The complexes are too strong. But here's the paradox. You are not responsible for what was done to you, but you are responsible for what you do now. The unconscious repeats until consciousness appears. That moment of recognition, that's your responsibility. So yes, the origins are not your fault, but the work of waking up is yours. Why does it feel easier to repeat than to change? Because repetition is familiar. It may be painful, but it is known. The psyche clings to what is known because the unknown feels unbearable. Better the prison I recognize than the freedom I don't yet trust. That's why you return to the same partner, the same habit, the same failure. Not because it makes you happy, but because it makes you feel safe. And the unconscious prefers safety over growth. That is why change feels like death. Because in a way, it is. It is the death of the old script, the death of the identity you've carried, the death of the prison you've called home. If the unconscious keeps repeating, doesn't that mean I'm doomed? No. Repetition is not condemnation. It is invitation. Think of it like a dream. If you ignore a dream, it may return again and again, more intense each time. Not because it wants to punish you, but because it wants to be heard. Repetition is the psyche's dream acted out in waking life. It continues only until you listen. The moment you face it, The moment you give it space in consciousness, the dream softens. You are not doomed. You are being asked to awaken. What if I don't know what my pattern is? That's normal. Most people can't see their own script. It hides too well. But here's the clue. Look at your strongest emotions. Where do you feel shame? Where do you feel anger? Where do you feel abandoned? These are the footprints of the complex. Follow them. Another clue. Listen to the phrases you repeat. Do you often say, "Why does this always happen to me? I swore I'd never do that again." Every time, it ends the same way. Those phrases are not complaints. They are confessions. The unconscious is speaking through them. So you do know your pattern. It's written in your emotions. It's written in your words. It's written in your history. You only need the courage to look. If my pattern comes from childhood, does that mean I'll never be free? No. It means the child within you is still waiting to be seen. Jung would say, complexes are fragments of the soul. They are alive. They are waiting. When you recognize them, when you listen to them, when you bring them into dialogue, you do not erase them. You integrate them. Freedom does not come from killing the past. It comes from holding it, from carrying it with awareness, from making it part of the whole. What if facing my shadow makes me worse? That is the fear. That if you look too closely, you'll drown. That if you open the door, the darkness will swallow you whole. But here's the truth. What you don't face controls you already. What you fear is already acting out. It is already writing your script. Facing it does not make it worse. It makes it conscious. And consciousness is the beginning of freedom. Yes, it is painful. Yes, it is overwhelming at times. But it is also healing. Because pain carried in darkness becomes poison. But pain carried in light becomes medicine. What if I try to change and fail again? You will. At first. Because repetition has momentum. Because habits are strong. Because the shadow does not give up easily. But failure in this work is not the end. It is part of the process. Every time you notice, even if you fail again, you are building awareness. You are loosening the hold. Think of it like a knot. The first pull does not untangle it, but each pull loosens it, and eventually, the knot gives way. So expect to fail. But see failure not as proof of doom, but as proof that the work is alive. Freud and Jung both saw the same pattern. They only described it differently. Freud called it the compulsion to repeat, the death instinct pulling us back into what destroys us. Jung called it the return of the shadow, the psyche staging a play until the truth is integrated. Two visions, one darker, one more hopeful, but both pointing to the same truth. You cannot run from yourself. What is unconscious will always return. So, what does that mean for you, here now? It means this. The next time you find yourself in the familiar place, the argument, the addiction, the heartbreak, the shame, don't look away. Pause. Ask yourself the question, what unfinished story is being repeated right now? What part of me is asking to be seen? What role am I replaying unconsciously? Because once you can name it, the play begins to change. The actors lose their grip. The shadow softens. And slowly, a new ending becomes possible. I want to leave you with this image. Imagine your life as a labyrinth. Each mistake is not a dead end. It is a marker, a sign saying, you've been here before. And if you follow the signs with awareness, they don't trap you. They guide you deeper, toward the center, toward yourself. That is what Freud glimpsed in repetition. That is what Jung saw in the shadow. That is what you are being asked to live. So remember this. Every mistake that repeats is not just a failure. It is the psyche's message. It is your shadow's invitation. It is your unfinished story, asking to be lived through, so it can finally let you go. The question is not whether it will return. It will. The question is whether you will recognize it, whether you will face it, whether you will write a new ending. That choice is yours.